Okay, we're recording. Alrighty, so as you all know, this is kind of the 101 first webinar session. I will be doing a bit of a series of these to start to provide that real kind of well-rounded education for employers and recruiters when they're starting to think about hiring people and how they might be able to do that. So this is 101. So if you have done a little bit of immigration type work in the past, or you've dealt with migrants in your business, or you maybe used to be involved in the 457 program, which lots of people were in the past, this might be a little bit basic for you, but certainly will be a great refresher if you do know anything. And if you're unfamiliar with the process and what it looks like, this is a perfect way for you to get started. So who am I? I'm Rachel. I'm an immigration lawyer. I have 12 years of very solid experience, mostly or pretty much 100% in immigration law, except for the moments that I dabbled in criminal law and a bit of personal injury. I've worked all over Australia in immigration law, everything from working with corporates through to asylum seekers. So it's kind of what I do, and I have been doing it for quite a long time. I am the founder and director of Passage Migration Consulting, which essentially was created really to be able to start to provide that education piece while also providing clients with the ability to have a lawyer on their side when they're trying to get through the migration maze. And as you can kind of see here by the tinsel background, that is the recording for my YouTube channel, Diver Migration Lawyer. Not really your average lawyer. I don't subscribe to the pinstripe suits on Waterfront Place. Although I have worked there in the past and I used to have some pinstripe suits, don't subscribe to that right now. So a little bit of excitement will be shared through the presentation, and I hope you really get something out of it. I do want to make sure that if there's any questions, please put your hand up, or sorry, don't put your hand up, put it in the chat box. I will try and get to them. If I don't, for some reason, get to your questions during the presentation, I'll make sure I send you an email afterwards answering those questions. Also, you will get a copy of the recording, as I mentioned earlier, so you can go back and start to learn more if there was something that you thought you missed. I will try and keep the presentation to 45 minutes, but I do like to talk a bit. And then the idea with the extra 15 minutes that we've got will be to have some questions afterwards. So don't be shy, ask questions. If you've got a question, then definitely the next person has a question too. So our agenda for today, so we're going to be talking about the skills crisis, which I know all of you are very aware of, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here. We'll talk about, we'll go through a bit of a visa program overview. We'll run through the skilled occupation list and what essentially they mean. We'll talk about sponsorship pathways and what they look like. I'll answer a few of the frequently asked questions that come up often in every sort of transaction that I have or a relationship that I have with a business. And then we'll talk about the takeaways for you to take away from this today. So the first thing is all of these articles, really encompass exactly what's been going on in the Australian labour market at the moment. The Guardian's talking about skill shortage reaching a staggering level. They've also talked about the National Skills Commission updating the skill priority list, which is very interesting. The National Skills Commission does have essentially responsibility for understanding what the skills shortages are in Australia, especially when we're going through something like a crisis like we are at the moment. And they are then sort of directly responsible for then creating or adding to or subtracting to, depending on what the situation is, from the skilled occupation list that the government uses for the purposes of migration. So there was some interesting sort of things happening in that space in the last few months. And I will have a newsletter coming out very soon, which will kind of give you all of the updates on those things. The Sydney Morning Herald, again, talks about Australia's in a skills crisis where we've got strong projected employment growth, and this means these shortages are only going to get worse in the future. The Financial Review talks about the second most severe labour shortage in the world, according to the OECD Economic Outlook. And then SBS News, again, then kind of starts to raise the idea of potentially migration being one of the ways forward. I'm certainly not suggesting that migration is the only thing that you need to incorporate into your business strategy to be able to help the labor crisis that you might be facing in your business or your industry, but certainly it's something that can supplement what you've already got going on. So that's where we're at. Everybody's talking about it. Everyone knows how it feels. I spoke to someone last week. They had a software engineer role for a geology technology company. The role had been advertised for 14 months, and they haven't been able to fill it. So needless to say, there is lots of software engineers all over the world, and something like that can definitely be helped by migration, at least in the short term. So what can, So what can your business do different? Obviously, as I sort of mentioned, migration is going to be something that you can start to think about. So the big thing here is to start to look at alternative labour sources. Is it offshore migration? Is it students that are already in Australia? Is it people that have just finished university? Do you have a good training program? Are you training your Australian workers to be able to upskill them or cross-skill them depending on what their role is? And do you have a real strategic framework for labour? The strategic framework for labour is becoming more and more important as we get deeper and deeper into this skills crisis, and that really spreads over bunches of different industry in Australia. The reality is, if you don't have a clear labour strategy in place, then you're going to get left behind. And so being able to sit down and, get a little bit more education about something like migration, and then, start to think about your onboarding and training processes as well. All of that integrated, as well as utilising your Australian workforce and upskilling them, is really something that really needs to be nailed down in order for you to, for businesses to survive and thrive in sort of what we're going through in the Australian labour market at the moment. So from a visa program overview, sorry about my slides there, everyone jumping through. From a visa program overview point of view, this is what you want to know. Great. So I say, go and get a migration strategy, add it into your labour strategy, make this work. And what you want to do is then start to pick and choose the types of visas that might be available to you as a business and what they might be used for. So what they might be used, so that, as you can sort of see on the, sorry, I've got people coming in going, just, so the first one you've got there is your something like a casual, low skilled, or maybe you want to get someone into a probation period to really understand what they can do, and if it's an employment relationship that's right for both of you. So you might, for this type of role or this type of workforce, what you might start to look at is student visa holders and also work and holiday visa holders. So as a result of COVID, everything changed, as we know, but everything changed in a migration sense as well. So the student visas and the working holiday visas at the moment don't actually have a work restriction on them. In the past, what they did have, and there is still currently a condition on these visas that indicate that for a student visa, you can only work 40 hours in a fortnight. That's currently waived. So student visa holders can work more than that. And a working holiday visa holder used to be able to only work for 6 months with one employer within a 12-month period. But that has now also been waived without having to get special permission from the government. So where you've got a highly casualised workforce, or you are looking to potentially upskill someone, these might be two of the types of visas that you could start to look at to really start to build out your workforce, where they don't have potentially don't have the skills to be sponsored in a visa, but certainly have the basic amount of skills to start to do the job, and again start to help you in your labour shortages. The next type of visas that you might have a look at is someone that wants to do work experience, or you want to start a graduate program. They might be early career anyone, not lawyers. There might just be someone early in their career really wanting to make a start. So if they're not, and they have more skills. So potentially they've gone to university in Australia. They maybe have even a bachelor level qualification, and you're willing to hire them in sort of like almost like a graduate or training type capacity. So the first visa available is the graduate visa, and this essentially allows people with bachelor level qualifications to be able to work in Australia for sort of a standard amount of usually about 2 to 4 years, depending on the qualification that they achieve. And they can work for your business and you don't have to sponsor them, but they can be working for your business. You can be upskilling them, and then they will eventually be ready to be sponsored if that's something that business is willing to do. The alternative to that is the training visa. So a training visa might be used for potentially a program where maybe they don't have a bachelor level qualification, so they haven't studied in Australia. Training visa might be used for professional to get professional registration or licensing, and so for something like a nurse, it might also be used to upskill in your current occupation. So, for example, if you've got someone that's a support worker, but you're looking to build them up to speed on what is a residential care worker, they would need to show at least 12 months of relevant work experience to be able to transition through that training program and be eligible for that training program. But that is another way of starting to upskill people and really starting to build out your workforce from the ground up. Now, obviously, training and lower skilled staff are all wonderful, and it's really great to have them on board, and obviously they're going to build out your workforce. The difficulty is, though, that where you don't have the high skills in your business, where you don't have the experience in your business, you're running the risk of potentially things going wrong on site, potentially your junior people not even being able to be trained because you don't have any senior employees. There is just a bunch of different valuable things that a skilled and experienced employee can bring to your business. So there's two ways of looking at that, and two ways of bringing people in to be able to support your business at that more highly skilled and more experienced level. So the first one is the 400 visa. And that is something that's highly specialized, short-term, non-ongoing work. So you might have a project for 6 months, you really, really need someone, you've been advertising in Australia, hasn't worked out, and now you're able to go and get this 400 visa. The alternative to that is that you can sponsor someone, and you can sponsor someone for up to 2 or 4 years, and that's on the temporary skills shortage visa. So because this short to long-term work is really where most people play from a business perspective and from a business support perspective, what I'm going to do is just dig a little bit deeper into each of the 400, the 482, and there's also sort of a regional version of the 482. So as I mentioned with the 400 visa, this is highly specialized work. So you can't come to me and say, or, go to your migration representative or go to the department and say, hey, I want to sponsor this person. They've just graduated from university. I promise they're highly specialized. The reality of that is that the visa is going to be refused because they're not. The most recent 400 visas I've done are for people that have got sort of generally 5, 7, 10, 20 years experience. It can be also in any occupation. So something like a driller, for example, is not on the skilled occupation list, but the technology that's coming into Australia at the moment with drilling, deeper holes, wider holes, narrower holes, all of these things, that technology wasn't available in Australia. And so our drillers are not necessarily trained up in that. So what we can do is we can sort of handpick people from around the world that have used that technology. They're then therefore highly specialized, and we'll be able to get them a visa. So drillers are one of the big ones that I'm doing at the moment. The work has to be non-ongoing. So that it needs to be non-ongoing essentially for the purposes of the 400 visa. The intention can't be to keep that person on board forever, but obviously program requirements and project requirements change. So if you do have someone on a 400 visa, once they get to Australia, the project gets extended, or maybe their contract gets extended because they're a superstar, you don't want to lose them, and they're willing to stay on board, then you might be able to start to think about jumping over to the 482. This, as it sort of says on the screen, this can be in any occupation. This is super important because the other two visas up on the screen there, the 482 and the 494, really require you to be, I guess, restricted by the skilled occupation list. The 400 visa isn't restricted, but the difficulty with not choosing an occupation on the skilled occupation list is that if you don't, and then you want to jump someone over to a 482, you're not necessarily going to have the capacity to do that if the occupation is not on the skilled occupation list. So if you're thinking of something like and that's more of a long-term plan, and the 482 is really, the 400 visa is really the starting point, you want to make sure that that occupation can be sort of carried across any visas in the future. And this, it doesn't have an age limit, and you can have it for up to 6 months. So generally they'll easily grant one for 3 months. If you want one for 6 months, you need to show that you've got a a really strong need. Most businesses at the moment can show that they've got a really strong need, really good business case, because everyone's been advertising roles flat out and no one's really getting responses. So that business case is a little bit easier at the moment to put forward. The next one is the subclass 482 or the TSS. So for anyone that used to do immigration in the past, this essentially is the 457 visa rebranded. As if you had anything to do with migration in the past, the 457 visa got a bit of a bad rap. Things didn't go so great for it. So the government woke up one day and decided they were changing everything. So it's very similar to the 457, but it has a few very distinct differences that are really important. So one of those is that you need to do labour market testing for every occupation, and unless there's, they fall into one of the sort of limited exceptions. And that labour market testing really needs to be done across 3 different platforms or in 3 different sources, essentially. So you could have 2 ads on Seek running at 2 different times, but you might do an ad on Seek, an ad on Indeed. And then the third resource always has to be the Workforce Australia government website. So there's essentially like the government version of Seek. All jobs that are put forward to the government for the purposes of TSS visa must be advertised on this platform. And so that's something to consider. This visa will give you someone for up to 2 years, or up to 2 years for the short-term list and up to 4 years for the long-term list. And we'll talk about what those lists mean in a minute. There is no age limit. People need to have a minimum of 2 years of work experience. And there's obviously English and skills criteria attached to all of these, and it's a different thing based on different occupation lists. And the minimum salary is always $53,900, but there has been some discussion recently about that being increased or changed, but at this point nothing's happened. Then you've got the subclass 494, which is the regional sponsored version. So this is essentially a regional version of the TSS, but it does have a few additional kind of different things again. So where the TSS needed 2 years of experience, this one needs 3. Where the TSS gives you a visa for potentially up to 4 years, the 494 will give you a visa for up to 5. The skilled occupation list that this one grabs their occupations from that you can be so that you can get this visa is more wide-ranging to get that 5-year visa. Obviously, the catch is that you need to live and work in a regional area. You also need to get certification from the regional area. So essentially, there's what's called a regional certifying body that covers off a bunch of different areas throughout Queensland, throughout Australia. And we write to that regional body and say, hey, I want to sponsor this person in this occupation. And generally, they want to know that you've advertised the role and how much you're going to be paying, so that they can see that you've been paying at least Australian market rates for that role. The individual also needs to do a mandatory skills assessment for this visa. That can sometimes trip people up. Sometimes it throws out timing a little bit, especially if timing's really tight. But that is one of the key considerations for this one. So that's a quick overview, and I will give everyone a copy of these slides, because those slides, that slide there can really work as a bit of a checklist. So when you're starting to consider where you want to go with the visa program. So then the next thing is, what are the skilled occupation lists? So I've kind of, thrown around the term a little bit while I've been talking. So one of the big changes when the 457 got a rebrand in 2018 was that the skilled occupation list essentially got pulled apart. It got ripped into 2. A bunch of occupations got deleted, and essentially what happened is that the skilled occupation list now do all of these 3 things on the screen. So they indicate if a visa is possible in the standard way of getting a visa, and we'll talk about what that means in a sec. They determine the length of the visa that's available to someone, depending on the visa program that they're in. And they also decide if that person has access to permanent residency if they're working in that occupation. So the skilled occupation lists are very important to understand. So these are the 3 different skilled occupation lists that have come as a result of the big changes that happened in 2018. Now, these occupation lists that I've got on the screen here are really related to the TSS. As I mentioned, the 494 essentially has access to all of these lists, and the 400 visa really has access to whatever occupation you want. So this skilled occupation list on the screen here, when I'm talking about years and employment employer-sponsored PR, really lends itself to the TSS visa, which is the one that most of you would use to be able to sponsor people in your business. So the first one is the medium to long-term skill shortage list. So this is essentially the A list. This is the celebrity occupations. This is the ones that are in high demand, and these are the ones that are going to jump to a priority skilled list when we have priority list running. So there is a priority list running at the moment, but it's not a separate list. It's just kind of some occupations that get bumped up the line, and that's really dependent on what the government says we need and what's a priority at the time. As you can imagine, during COVID, things like doctors and nurses would jump to that list. As was a person that does all the technical side of geology, which was very interesting. So the medium to long-term skill shortage list will give you a visa for up to 4 years, and give your individuals a visa for up to 4 years, and will also allow access to permanent residency through the employer-sponsored scheme. So that's probably the best outcome that an applicant can have on choosing a skilled occupation list, but this won't be available for everyone. On this list, you've got everything from doctors to nurses to all of your engineers, all of your most of your trade occupations. And so that's kind of who sits on that one. Then you've got the short-term skills shortage list. So this gives individuals a visa for 2 years, and then the ability to access one more 2-year visa in Australia. There is talk of a third 2-year visa in Australia at the moment, but currently this is restricted to people that were working in Australia during COVID holding this visa. There is no access to employer-sponsored PR for the people that are on this occupation list, though. So the people that are on this list are pretty much anything creative, so marketing specialists, advertising specialists. There is, and a lot of the technician type roles that are on this list. Then you've got the regional occupation list. So this one only allows you to work in a regional area if you're in this occupation. And so there is a fitness center manager that's on this list, for example. So someone that essentially runs a gym or a fitness center, but they have to be living in a regional area. And the good thing about this list, though, is that you can get a visa for up to 4 years. The not so great thing is that you don't have access to PR unless you can get it through a different way. So importantly, when I say they don't have access to a permanent residency on this slide, all that's referring to is they don't necessarily, or they do, depending on the list, they do or they don't have access to permanent residency based under the employer-sponsored scheme. That doesn't necessarily stop them from getting a permanent visa. It doesn't completely cancel out all of their options. But what it does do, it means that from a planning perspective, a business can really decide, okay, well, this person's going to be able to get access to permanent residency in 3 years. So we're going to start to think about our employment process, how that's going to look, how they're going to pay for it, what that looks like for our business. And you can start to do a little bit of better planning. Whereas if someone doesn't have access to permanent residency through an employer-sponsored scheme, it means that, you can, from the very get-go, I always like to tell people, hey, this is not going to give you employer-sponsored PR, but it might be something that you want to look at yourself. And then at least individuals kind of know then exactly what they're looking for and what they can plan for in their futures. Okay. Sorry, my slides have just decided to stop working. Okay, here we go. All right. Then we've got, sorry, my slides are skipping and jumping. So the next thing we want to talk about, excuse me, is the sponsorship pathways. So there is a couple of different pathways. The one that most businesses would go down is the standard business sponsorship, but for some businesses that won't be possible. So when we're thinking about sponsorship pathways, I've added 3 different pathways on the screen because I think that if you're going to go down the pathway of including immigration in your labour strategy, there really needs to be a commitment to something new. There needs to be a commitment to potentially changing something within your business or creating some different way of doing things to be able to start to integrate migration into your maybe your usual standard labour policies and the way that you recruit, how you do things. And so there's 3 ways. So we can do a commitment to something new, which everyone has to do. There's a standard business sponsorship, and then there's also a labour agreement. So when you're considering which of those pathways is going to be right for you, or when I'm considering which of those pathways is right for you, strategy should always be to strategically, the pathway should always be strategically created to complement your business growth. Wow, that was a mouthful, sorry. So strategically created to complement your business growth. The reality is that what's right for one business is not going to be right for the next business. So what we want to do is we want to try and really maintain what your business plan is for the future, what that looks like, and then really just start to supplement different bits and pieces of a new strategy or an alternative or a supplementary strategy into your business to really support it into the future. So maybe you've got growth goals, maybe you've got expansion goals, whatever that looks like. Maybe you've just got a goal to get some more staff because you're really struggling at the moment. That's pretty much a goal at the moment for most businesses. But that really needs to be strategically created to complement what you're already doing. So that's what I do. That's what I sit down with businesses, talk about what they're doing in their business at the moment and how they're going to be utilizing migration to be able to support their goals moving forward. So these are the different types of sponsorship pathways. As I kind of alluded to earlier, there's always got to be a commitment, and it's commitment to something new. So the first thing might be that you're starting to think about ways of integrating working holiday makers or student visa holders or trainees or graduates into your structured program. Maybe you don't currently have a graduate program. Maybe you don't currently have like a junior version of whatever the roles are in your business, but maybe that's something that you can start to integrate to be able to upskill people into different roles. And that's definitely not just for foreign workers. I know I still remember coming out of university and not having access to employment immediately. And it was terrifying. And I know that even in the legal industry, that still happens. People are not getting jobs straight out of university. And so having that graduate program or training program in place from the very beginning is really helpful to start to upskill people and build them up from sort of that really green version of whatever occupation they're going to be working in. And then the next big thing is to understand what is required from your business if you're kind of going to embark on this new immigration and employment strategy journey. You really want to know, what are you going to have to do? Do you have to do labour market testing? Do you need to start to think about talking to a recruitment company about trying to hire from overseas? Do you need to have a cultural diversity policy in place? Do you need to maybe tweak your onboarding process a little bit? Start to think about all of the parts of your business that are going to be touched by changing your labour strategy. And then one of the other big things is to try and create a good employee experience from the very beginning. I can appreciate that obviously most of you have got an onboarding process already, but the reality is if you're bringing in someone from overseas, they don't necessarily know where the local Woolies is. They don't know that you get on the blue bus to go around the city for free. They don't know where to get petrol. They don't know all of these things. They don't know how to spread Vegemite. And then we get all those rumors around where people are trying to eat Vegemite like Nutella, and we all know that that's not the way you do it. So have an onboarding process that starts to encompass some sort of everyday real life things so that people can get really acquainted with Australia and start to feel welcomed as soon as they get here. And then the next big thing for the commitment phase is start. If you haven't started, start thinking about it, start planning, start deciding how this might work. The next one is the standard business sponsorship. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the one where most businesses are going to fall. And this is because this is the business sponsorship that allows you to sponsor occupations on any of the lists that we just talked about. So that's just the abbreviated versions. So the MITSL, the SNITSL, and the ROLL. So we love it. We love a good acronym in immigration land. So there's your acronyms for the skilled occupation list. This will allow you to sponsor essentially as many workers as you want for up to 5 years. And the employing entity is always the sponsor. So there's a few other things that you need to kind of meet, but essentially as long as your business is actively and lawfully operating, you don't have any discriminatory work practices, recruitment practices like only hiring from offshore, for example, then certainly that should be quite a straightforward process. The alternative is a labour agreement. So if you're one of the businesses, like a drilling company, for example, that doesn't have a occupation on the skilled occupation list, then there has to be a special agreement negotiated with the Australian government to figure out the terms and conditions of what a sponsorship might look like when you're hiring people from an off-list occupation. So if you kind of think about it from the government's perspective, they've said these are all the occupation lists that are in demand.
But when you or your business, or I would have to go to them and say, actually, there's this other occupation that you forgot, and here's all the reasons why this occupation is actually really in demand. So how you would go about that essentially is there's a whole bunch of industry research that needs to go on. We would need to consult with stakeholders, including unions, if that applies to your industry. And you essentially really need to just demonstrate there's an obvious skill shortage. Again, because everyone's really struggling with labour at the moment, it shouldn't be as difficult to prove at the moment, but you would essentially have needed to exhaust all avenues. So have you done all the normal labour market testing things that's required by the government, but then have you done other things? Gone out to regional areas, gone on Facebook, all of these things that, you've really just tried to tap into the labour market, the Australian labour market, as much as possible, but it's just not happening. And there's just not enough humans in Australia to do the job in your industry. Again, your business needs to be actively and lawfully operating. And for both the standard business sponsorship and the labour agreement, sponsorship obligations would always apply. So let's then jump into a few frequently asked questions, because these I've just gone with top 3 questions that I am asked in every interaction with every company. So how long is it going to take? The reality is, how long is a piece of string? We are dealing with one of the government departments that has a huge backlog of work at the moment. But generally, if you're starting to think about planning, business planning, labour planning, project planning, generally about 3 months. If you plan for about 3 months, and it's a straightforward application with nothing too crazy in it, 3 months is going to get you a preparation phase, a processing phase, and then like a boots on the ground phase. So that should be fairly standard. The little sort of info box in the corner, though, those does say processing times will depend on the type of visa that you're applying for or the individual's applying for. In some instances, the country that they're coming from. And so something like a 400 visa isn't processed in Australia, it's processed in the offshore processing centres outside Australia. So I had some applications in some of the African countries earlier this year, but what I didn't realise, or what we didn't know, was that some of the offices in Africa for the processing centres was actually closed for a good portion of the first half of this year due to COVID, because they haven't quite totally recovered yet. So that meant that their work was essentially being farmed out to other offshore processing centres, and that caused a bit of delay. So not a huge amount of delay, but it sort of meant that anything where we were kind of thinking a visa was going to come through in about 4 weeks, it came through in more like 12 weeks. So a bit of a delay, and kind of puts a bit of a damper on planning. But generally, around 3 months is what you could plan for. I would always tell you, though, if I think there's going to be some sort of delay, another migration lawyer would tell you as well, if they think there's going to be a specific delay, it's always, better for you to know up front. How much will it cost? Oh, that's annoying. Don't mind my little light bulb in the middle of the screen there. So this is, again, only for the TSS visas, and this is assuming a turnover of more than $10 million for a business. So a business annual turnover is dependent on how much you pay for a Skilling Australians Fund levy, which is essentially an additional fee by the government that was introduced with the changes in 2018. Then where you used to pay a certain portion of your salary expenditure to training Australians within your business, this fee is now paid to the government, put in a pool of money, and that's used for training Australian workers. So that fee will fluctuate depending on the annual turnover of your business and how many years the visa is for that you're applying. So for a 2-year visa, all inclusive, including legal fees, government lodgement fees, you're looking at about $8,000. For a 4-year, you're looking at something more like $14,000, and this is for businesses with a turnover of more than $10 million. Things like, then there's additional costs like medicals, English testing, or police clearances. Generally, that would be responsibility of the visa applicant, unless you wanted someone to go and do a very specific medical, for example, to get onto site in Australia. So as it sort of mentions in the corner again, costs are dependent on the pathway that we're going down from a visa perspective, and also the annual turnover and the type of sponsorship that your company holds. FAQ number 3. What if it doesn't work? Well, you terminate the employment, you notify the Department of Immigration, and then you pay for their flights home. If it doesn't work out, you hire and fire just based on Australian migration laws. The reality of this is that, you know, like you would treat any other Australian employee is how you should treat any foreign employee that you have. Obviously, it's not an ideal situation if it doesn't work out. So the onboarding and recruitment processes are really important when you're hiring workers from offshore. You want to have a really solid recruitment process. Can they video you things that they've done at work? Do they have really good references? Can you actually verify those references? You know, do they have experience in, you know, the same climate, particularly if they're working outdoors? All of these types of things, start to think about those things in your recruitment process. From an onboarding process, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, ensure that they feel welcomed, ensure that they're part of the team. And ensure as well that what you're paying people is against market rates. It's competitive. So that's generally the things that I've ever seen that things don't work out. Generally, it's for one of those reasons. So otherwise, if things don't work out, it is what it is, unfortunately. So yes, it's a bit of an investment if it doesn't work out. But the reality is, what if it does work out? Your business is then ahead of the game. You've got a unique selling proposition to go forward, to pitch for projects, to get more work, to grow your team, to grow your business. So what if it does work? Let's not focus on, you know, if it doesn't work. It is, you know, all employee relationships might not work out. But the reality is, if you're hiring in people from overseas, you're almost, you know, creating a bit of loyalty by purely investing in someone from the very get-go. And then if you take really seriously that recruitment and onboarding phase of someone's employment, then you should have a really solid person to be able to start work. In the 12 years that I've been doing this, I haven't seen very many relationships break down. I did have one instance where I had 2 people screaming either side of me, but I think that was just a personality clash more than anything, to be honest. But otherwise, I've seen really good things happen as a result of people coming in from immigration. I've got people that I did visas for 10 years ago now that now own sort of multi-billion-dollar companies. And so there is a real benefit in being able to start to diversify your workforce, bring in different cultures, bring in a bit of excitement, and just embrace it and see if it'll really work for you. So that's all I've got to say. Other than, if you want to just start, I will be doing free consultations for everyone in the webinar for the month of January. So if you want to get in touch, my email address is in the bottom corner there, and just email me with the code New Year, New Plan, and we can get started on whatever you want to do. Let's try and create a labour strategy. Let's try and make this work. I know that everyone's really in a bit of a not so great place at the moment of labour, but I really think that this is something that might be able to assist. So unless anyone has any questions, that's me. I went over by 7 minutes, but I got there. Any questions from anyone? No. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you joining in. Please keep out an eye out for invitations for future webinars. I will start to build out different things. I will start to build out different webinars in the future, and really start to, when I start to get different questions around different parts of migration, I will build webinars so people have that knowledge. What I really want to do, and this will all be on my YouTube channel, as I mentioned, Diary of a Migration Lawyer. I want to build out a bit of an education network for people so that you know what you're doing and it can really help you to make big decisions. So thank you for coming, and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Thanks, bye.